Hello everyone, tonight we're about to settle into something that might feel a little too close for comfort. Picture this, the soft clinking of silverware on porcelain, the faint aroma of rosemary chicken still hovering in the air, and a chandelier above us that has watched over birthdays, holidays, and Sunday roasts for more than a decade. It should have been a cozy evening, the kind where conversation meanders between school stories and weather complaints. But sometimes, the places that are supposed to feel safest become the stage for betrayals you never imagined. And if you've never had someone at your own table turn into an enemy, well, statistically speaking, you might not survive the illusion that family loyalty always holds. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I love seeing how far these late night journeys reach. Now turn off the lights. Maybe leave a fan humming in the background for a soft blanket of noise. And let's begin our walk into the shadows of my story tonight. The evening that started, it all began quietly enough. My son Jonathan sat at the table, a little distracted, stabbing half-heartedly at mashed potatoes that had already cooled. His wife Cassandra had that tight smile she wore whenever she was preparing to deliver some kind of moral lecture. And then there was Isabella, my granddaughter. Her small hands folded neatly on the napkin in her lap, blissfully unaware of the tension building like static electricity across the table. I should have known something was coming. The air had that sharp edge like the way the sky feels right before lightning cracks open the night. Cassandra leaned forward, her voice dripping with something colder than sarcasm. "What's it like being an old capitalist who's going to die alone?" she asked, as if it were casual dinner conversation, as if it were no more consequential than asking me to pass the salt. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. Age does that to you sometimes. You catch only half a phrase and hope you filled in the blanks wrong. But the look in her eyes told me I hadn't misheard anything. There was no joke behind her words, no sly grin to soften the blow. Just disdain. I set down my wine glass carefully, the way you set down something fragile when your hands are shaking. "What's it like not receiving another cent from this old capitalist?" I replied evenly. My voice felt steadier than the rush in my chest. A small intellectual note floated through my mind, almost like an academic footnote. When people weaponize ideology at the dinner table, it stops being debate and starts becoming strategy. Jonathan froze his fork halfway to his mouth, gravy dripping back onto the plate. Isabella looked between us, confusion painting her face. And Cassandra, she didn't expect my reply. Her face blanched, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. For a heartbeat, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She tried to recover, wrapping her tone in the silken threads of false apology. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. I get carried away about justice sometimes. You know how I am? Justice. That word again. Twisted and bent until it became a tool, not a principle. She called decades of building a firm from the ground up mere resources like they had fallen from the sky and I just happened to scoop them up. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but I didn't. Because underneath her flimsy excuse, I heard something else. She wasn't sorry for what she'd said. She was only sorry I had heard her say it out loud. I looked at Jonathan, my only child now, 28, the boy I had raised to think for himself. His eyes didn't meet mine. He was staring at his plate as if the mashed potatoes could offer him refuge. He mumbled, "Mom, she didn't mean it like that," but his voice lacked conviction. He had been smoothing over her edges for years now, like a man polishing glass already cracked through the middle. "Of course she meant it," I said softly, still watching Cassandra's face. The question wasn't whether she meant it, it was how long she had been thinking it. It's a strange thing about age. You collect wisdom, yes, but you also collect blind spots. I had spent years excusing her sharp comments, her constant lectures about social equity, her endless requests for temporary loans that never seemed to return. Like someone gathering odd stones along a path, I had put each uneasy moment in my pocket and forgotten it. But sitting there under that chandelier, those stones suddenly felt like a mountain crushing me. I told Isabella gently, "Sweetheart, why don't you go upstairs and finish your homework?" My voice was calm, almost cheerful, though my insides were vibrating like piano strings stretched too tight. Jonathan encouraged her too, and she padded upstairs, her innocence still intact for the moment. Once she was gone, Cassandra leaned back in her chair, slipping on that mask of superiority she wore like jewelry. "It's not personal," she insisted. "It's about principles." Principles. My mind almost laughed, but my heart was too heavy. Principles had built the very roof above her head, the private school her daughter attended, the groceries she insisted had to be organic, the so-called volunteer work that I alone seemed to bankroll. In that moment, I realized something unsettling, an academic-style paradox I couldn't ignore. When generosity is reinterpreted as guilt, kindness becomes a weapon turned back against the giver. I excused myself, stood slowly, joint stiff from both age and the weight of betrayal, and walked toward the kitchen. As I rinsed plates at the sink, staring out at the garden I had tended for 15 years, a peculiar thought struck me. Did you know that certain species of roses bloom brighter after you prune them back brutally, almost cruelly? It's as if they need the shock to remember their own strength. I wondered if that was what life was doing to me now, pruning back illusions so I could bloom again. Behind me, I heard their hushed whispers. Cassandra's voice low, but tinged with smugness, as if she believed she'd won some invisible contest. Jonathan's silence heavy as wet wool. And me, I stood at the sink, water rushing over dishes, realizing with clarity sharper than any blade I was not their beloved matriarch. I was their open wallet. That night, sleep never came. I lay in my bed, ceiling fan spinning slow circles overhead, replaying every moment of the past 3 years through a new lens. And I already knew tomorrow I would not wake as the same woman who had sat quietly at her own dinner table. I woke before dawn, the kind of early hour when the world still feels like it belongs only to insomniacs, bakers, and regretful souls. The first light of morning had not yet broken, but my mind was already restless, pacing through corridors of memory like a tenant rattling doors in a strange building. Cassandra's words from the dinner table replayed in a cruel loop. Old capitalist, die alone. Words can sometimes be sharper than knives. They linger longer too. Bruises fade. Insults nest in your marrow. I shuffled to my study, wrapped in a robe older than Cassandra's entire wardrobe. Funny how fabric wears differently when bought with sweat rather than entitlement. It lasts longer, like it knows it was earned. I pulled out bank statements, stacks of them papers I had filed neatly but rarely studied beyond quick glances. Numbers don't lie. They tell stories. And that morning, those stories began to scream at me. The requests were all there, in black and white tuition checks, written under the noble banner of educational justice. Transfers for car repairs, framed as standing up against predatory lending. Mortgage assistance defended as refusing to fund slumlords. Each expense had been cloaked in righteousness, and I had signed away my money with the pride of a woman supporting values that mattered. But looking at the sums now, the story looked less like activism and more like a shopping spree in disguise. A strange fact popped into my head, one of those odd tidbits I'd read years ago in an academic journal. The average con artist doesn't succeed because they're smarter, but because they frame their lies within values the victim already believes. It hit me like cold water. Cassandra hadn't simply asked for money, she had borrowed my own principles, dressed them in her voice, and handed them back to me like a poisoned gift. Jonathan's text arrived just as the sun broke over the horizon. He apologized, said Cassandra had been under stress from her volunteer work. Could we talk later? Volunteer work. I nearly laughed into my coffee. If luxury handbags counted as service, then yes, she had been volunteering plenty. I spent the morning searching online something I'd never thought to do before. Cassandra's name brought up endless, curated photographs her at brunch tables with champagne shopping bags tucked at her feet, her arm looped around Isabella with designer coats draped over both of them. The captions made me nauseous, grateful for life's abundance. Simple joys are the best joys. Simple joys that cost more than my first car. The comments were even worse. Friends asking how she could afford such things. Her smug reply, "I'm good at resource management. Some people just need to be educated about social responsibility." There it was, again the twisting of language, the intellectual sleight of hand. Education, responsibility, consciousness. All repurposed to justify indulgence. I sat back, phone trembling in my hand, realizing, with a bitterness I hadn't tasted before I had been her university. I was the tuition, the endowment, and the scholarship combined. She had graduated with honors in the art of extraction. That afternoon, while pulling weeds from the garden, I overheard the neighbor's wind chime and thought of something odd. I'd once read that the world's oldest known musical instrument is a 40,000-year-old flute carved from a bird's bone. Human beings have always turned the ordinary into tools for survival or manipulation. Cassandra was doing the same. She had carved me into an instrument, played my guilt and pride until the melody emptied my accounts. And yet my heart wasn't shattered so much as sharpened. Loneliness can do that. It crystallizes anger into resolve. I decided that evening that I would no longer be Cassandra's instrument. Tomorrow, I would begin playing my own song. Jonathan called again after dinner, his tone hesitant, almost pleading. "Mom, can we come over tomorrow? Cassandra wants to apologize." The irony nearly split me in half. Apologies from her were never apologies. They were rehearsals. Lines spoken to smooth cracks while she calculated the next demand. I agreed to the visit, but not for the reasons Jonathan thought. I wanted to see her eyes up close again, to watch the mask shift, to listen carefully for slips in her story. Because in the stillness of that sleepless night, I had reached a clear conclusion. Cassandra wasn't simply careless with money. She was playing a longer game. And if she thought I was just an aging pawn on her board, she was about to learn what happens when a queen decides to move differently. When Jonathan and Cassandra arrived the next afternoon, the weather mirrored my mood, bright sun outside, storm clouds swirling inside. I had prepared coffee, though my hands shook slightly as I set the cups on the table. Cassandra entered first, wearing a dress that shimmered like she'd dressed for a magazine shoot instead of a family visit. Her perfume announced itself before she even spoke, a citrusy cloud that tried too hard to signal sophistication. She launched into her performance right away. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry for what I said the other night. I didn't mean to upset you. Sometimes I get so carried away when I talk about fairness." Her tone was practiced, like a student reciting lines she had memorized in front of a mirror. I nodded, not committing myself. Jonathan hovered behind her, torn between embarrassment and loyalty. His eyes pleaded with me to let it slide, to keep the peace. But my mind was elsewhere. I remembered something from my college philosophy class. Plato once wrote that people reveal truth not only by what they say, but by the contradictions between their words and actions. Cassandra's contradictions were practically neon signs. After polite chatter, I excused myself to fetch cookies. In reality, I needed a moment to breathe. In the kitchen, I pulled open the drawer where I had hidden folders of documents, bank statements, receipts, and screenshots of Cassandra's social media. I spread them on the counter like puzzle pieces. The pattern was undeniable. For every large transaction from my account, there was a corresponding post, a weekend trip, a new handbag, a lavish dinner with friends. The coincidence was too consistent to ignore. She hadn't been unlucky or needy, she had been strategic. When I returned to the living room, Cassandra was scrolling on her phone. For a brief second, I saw the reflection of a boutique's website before she snapped it shut. She smiled sweetly as if I hadn't seen. Jonathan tried to fill the silence by talking about work, but even his words sounded rehearsed. He was parroting her narratives now, telling me how difficult it was for young families, how the economy was stacked against them. I wanted to shake him. He didn't know, or maybe didn't want to know, that his words weren't his. They were hers, inserted into his mind like carefully planted weeds. I thought of something odd I'd read about kudzu vines in the South introduced to prevent erosion. They ended up choking entire forests. Cassandra was kudzu. She wasn't nurturing. She was consuming. That night I returned to my study. The clock read midnight, but I was wide awake, pen in hand, scribbling notes. Numbers don't lie, I kept repeating to myself. People do, but numbers don't. By the time I added everything, the total was staggering: $67,000 gone in 3 years. And that wasn't including the automatic transfers for the mortgage and school fees. I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion pressing down. Yet under the fatigue, a spark flickered clarity. The evidence was mounting and the story was changing. Cassandra wasn't simply careless. She was deliberate. Her lectures about justice had been bait, her gratitude staged, her apologies scripted. I remembered something else. A peculiar fact I once shared at a dinner party in chess. The queen is the most powerful piece, but only because she combines the moves of others. Cassandra had been playing that role, moving in every direction, manipulating Jonathan's loyalty, Isabella's innocence, and my generosity. But I wasn't ready to be checkmated. Before dawn, I made a decision. Tomorrow I would call someone outside this tangled web of family. Someone who could look at the situation without sentiment. Because if Cassandra was playing a long game, then I needed to stop thinking like a mother and start thinking like a strategist. The next morning, I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. My fingers hovered for a second before pressing the final digit, a little tremor of hesitation coursing through me. The line rang twice, then a calm voice answered. "This is Philip Nguyen." Hearing his name stirred something familiar. Philip had been a colleague long ago, back when my hair was less gray and my days were spent in boardrooms instead of gardens. He'd since become a respected lawyer in town, a man with a reputation for cutting through lies like a scalpel. More importantly, he was one of the few people I trusted to separate sentiment from reality. "Philip, it's Eleanor. I need your help," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. He didn't hesitate. "What's going on?" I explained everything. Cassandra's cutting words at dinner, the money trail, the curated photos online, Jonathan's blind defenses. I half expected him to tell me I was overreacting, that family squabbles often look worse up close. But when I finished, he exhaled sharply. "You're describing a pattern, Eleanor. It's not just ingratitude. It sounds deliberate." There it was again, pattern. Numbers, timelines, transactions. My instincts had been right. Philip suggested we meet discreetly away from my house. So that afternoon we sat in a corner booth of a quiet cafe. He looked older, of course, but so did I. Still, there was a steadiness about him, the kind of presence you don't realize you've missed until it's in front of you again. He opened a leather notebook, took careful notes, and asked pointed questions. dates amounts Cassandra's background, or rather, the lack of it. I realized then how little I truly knew about her life before Jonathan. She had told stories of hardship, of a mother lost, of struggles to find footing, but the details had always been vague, and I'd never pressed harder. People like her often keep their past hidden, Philip said, tapping his pen thoughtfully. It makes it easier to reinvent themselves for the next target. His words made me shiver. Target. Was that what I had become? Not a mother-in-law, not even a person, just a mark on Cassandra's ledger. He offered to run a quiet background check, nothing official yet, just enough to see if cracks appeared. If she's done this before, there will be traces. There always are. I nodded, grateful. And then I laughed, a tired little sound. You know, Philip, at my age, I thought my biggest battles would be with arthritis, not con artists. He chuckled softly. Don't underestimate arthritis, Eleanor. At least it's honest pain. That moment of humor, small as it was, felt like breathing fresh air after weeks of suffocation. As we left, he gave me a look both firm and kind. You've worked too hard in life to let someone siphon it away. Stay cautious. And remember, manipulators often accelerate their plans once they sense suspicion, so keep your cards close. On the drive home, I thought about something odd. I'd once read octopuses are capable of escaping sealed jars from the inside. The moment they sense confinement, they plot their escape. Cassandra, I realized, was the same. If she sensed I was closing the lid, she'd wriggle, twist, and slip into some new angle of attack. Back in my garden, pruning shears in hand, I clipped away dead branches. The roses seemed grateful, standing taller once the weight was gone, and I thought perhaps that's what I was doing now, trimming back illusions, readying myself for growth. That evening, Jonathan called again. His voice was strained. Mom, Cassandra feels like you don't appreciate her. She says you're always judging her. I nearly laughed aloud, but bitterness stopped me. Jonathan, I said gently, does she ever tell you how much she appreciates me? Silence, then a mumbled excuse. He hung up soon after. As I stood in the quiet house, the phone still warm in my hand, a peculiar certainty settled in me. Cassandra was no longer just a thorn. She was a weed spreading roots. But now, with Philip's help, I had begun to see the outline of the garden clearly. And once you see the weeds for what they are, pulling them becomes inevitable. It was only 2 days later when the next piece of the puzzle fell into my lap. Or more accurately, it was handed to me across a white picket fence by my neighbor, Frances Miller. Frances has lived on our street for over 30 years, the kind of neighbor who knows everything. When your gutters need cleaning, when your azaleas bloom early, and unfortunately, when your family drama leaks into the open air. I was out trimming the hedges when she leaned over, lowering her voice as if we were sharing state secrets. Eleanor, I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything all right with your daughter-in-law? The question made me pause mid-snip. What makes you ask that? Frances adjusted her sun hat, eyes narrowing. Well, I saw her the other afternoon. She was parked outside your house for over an hour while you were gone. Very animated on the phone. Honestly, she looked furious. My chest tightened. Did you hear anything she said? Her cheeks flushed. Frances is nosy, but she hates being caught at it. Still, she confessed. My kitchen window was open. She was loud. She kept saying things like, "She's getting suspicious. We need to speed up the timeline." And she mentioned some name, Teresa, I think, and Frances hesitated. She said something about the old bat not being a problem much longer. The old bat. My knuckles went white around the hedge clippers. I forced my voice to remain calm. She mentioned my granddaughter. Frances nodded uneasily. Yes. She said Isabella's name more than once. That's when I got concerned. That evening I sat in my living room staring at the wallpaper like it might whisper answers. Cassandra wasn't just scheming, she was accelerating. There was a timeline, and there was someone else, Teresa. Another player in her theater. I thought of an odd fact I'd once read: some parasitic wasps lay their eggs inside caterpillars, letting their young feed from the inside until they burst out. The host continues to move to breathe, unaware it is already being hollowed. Was that me? A host being hollowed out while Cassandra prepared the final act. The following day, I called Jonathan. My voice wavered deliberately. "Son, I haven't been feeling well. Could you and Cassandra come by tonight? I want to discuss some family matters while I still can." Jonathan sounded alarmed. "Of course, Mom. We'll be there." When they arrived, Cassandra was all false concern, her hand on my arm as though she cared. "Eleanor, you look tired. You should be taking better care of yourself." I gave her a thin smile. Age does that. We sat in the living room, Jonathan fidgeting beside her. I looked at Cassandra directly. "I've been thinking about my will," I said, letting the word hang like smoke. Her eyes sharpened instantly, though she tried to hide it. Jonathan frowned. "Mom, you're healthy. You don't need to worry about that now." "Health can change quickly," I replied. I was considering setting up a trust for Isabella's education. Perhaps even placing the house in trust to avoid legal trouble down the line. Cassandra leaned forward slightly, like a cat spotting prey. "That's very wise. Isabella should be the primary beneficiary, of course. And until she's older, someone she trusts should manage it for her." Her meaning was obvious. Jonathan looked puzzled, but Cassandra's ambition was practically glowing from her face. Then I tilted my head casually. "Who's Teresa?" Her face drained of color, lips parting. "What?" "Teresa," I repeated smoothly. "I thought I overheard you mention her. Is she someone I should know?" For a split second, panic flickered across her face before she masked it with confusion. "You must be mistaken." Jonathan glanced between us, suspicion finally tugging at the edges of his blinders. I let the silence linger before smiling faintly. Perhaps I misheard. Age, you know. We spent another hour in shallow conversation, but the tension thickened like syrup. Cassandra kept glancing at her phone. Jonathan kept glancing at Cassandra. And me, I just kept smiling as though we were all enjoying a perfectly normal evening. But inside I felt something new rising. Not just fear, not just anger, but strategy. Cassandra thought she was closing in, but she didn't realize I had already begun to set my own pieces on the board. That night, as I closed the blinds and locked the doors, a strange calm washed over me. I remembered an old saying from my college debate team exposure: is the death of deception. All I had to do was shine enough light, and Cassandra's carefully crafted shadows would dissolve. Sleep became more of a visitor than a resident in my house. I drifted in and out, my dreams tangled with half-formed memories, and Cassandra's voice echoing like a bad radio signal. By the third night, I accepted what my body already knew: I would not rest until I had clarity. It was around 2 a.m. when I shuffled to the kitchen for tea and caught sight of the refrigerator door. Pinned with a magnet shaped like a sunflower was a crayon drawing Isabella had made me her daddy, and her holding hands under a blue sky. No Cassandra. At first, I thought it was sweet children draw what they love. But then I remembered Cassandra's words from that dinner. The coldness, the disdain. And I thought of something unsettling. Perhaps Isabella instinctively knew who belonged and who didn't. Children see truths adults excuse. But lately, Cassandra had been working overtime to reshape those truths. At our last lunch together, Isabella had parroted words that did not belong to a 12-year-old. "Mommy says you're forgetful sometimes, Grandma." She says it's normal for older people to get confused. She'd said it so innocently, swinging her legs under the chair, biting into an apple as though she hadn't just delivered a dagger to my chest. I managed to smile, then told her everyone forgets things sometimes. But inside, I was rattled. Cassandra wasn't just after money. She was constructing a narrative brick by brick in my own granddaughter's mind. A narrative of decline, incompetence, fragility. Jonathan, too, was drifting into Cassandra's script. He called one evening and said, "Mom, maybe you should let Cassandra help you with finances. It's a lot for you to manage." His voice was tentative, but the suggestion was hers. I could hear it. He was no longer my son speaking freely. He was an echo. It reminded me of a peculiar psychological study I once read about groupthink. When enough pressure is applied, even intelligent people conform to absurd conclusions like declaring two lines the same length when they are obviously different. Cassandra wasn't just manipulating me, she was orchestrating groupthink within my own family. I started to notice the small tactics. Cassandra would forget to include me in group photos, brushing it off as an accident. She'd make a show of explaining technology to me in front of others, as if I were a slow child. She even once asked Jonathan in my presence if he thought I should still be driving at my age. Each comment was a drop of acid, subtle enough to dismiss, corrosive enough to accumulate. One Saturday, when I picked Isabella up for a sleepover, she whispered, "Mommy says we'll probably live in your house one day." Her voice was uncertain, like she wasn't sure if it was a good thing. I felt a chill run down my spine. Cassandra wasn't waiting for inheritance, she was preparing to seize it while I still breathed. That night I sat in my garden with a blanket around my shoulders, staring at the moonlight splashed across the roses. Funny thing about roses, they defend themselves with thorns, yet they're still plucked, still stolen. Unless, of course, the gardener refuses to let the thief near the gate. I realized then that Cassandra's true weapon wasn't money. It was isolation. If she could convince Jonathan I was unstable and Isabella that I was fading, she'd box me into a corner. I'd be the irrelevant old woman no one listened to. The checkbook without a voice. But I still had my voice. And I still had my wits. And as long as I had those, I could fight back. I phoned Philip the next morning, told him everything. The whispers to Isabella, the suggestions to Jonathan, the planted seeds of incompetence. His reply was calm but firm. "She's building a case, Eleanor, not for your money only, for control. We need to move carefully, but we also need to move soon." I hung up the phone and stared at the crayon drawing again. 3 figures holding hands. No Cassandra. Perhaps Isabella was telling me something in her own quiet way. And perhaps it was time I listened. The following week, I decided to try something bold. It wasn't a plan I came to lightly, but I knew I had to see Cassandra's intentions laid bare. If she was weaving a net around me, then I would let her think I had stepped willingly into the center of it. I called her one afternoon, my voice deliberately shaky, as though age itself was pulling the strings. "Cassandra, dear, I've been feeling so overwhelmed with my accounts lately. Bill statements, all those numbers. I get so mixed up. Would you be willing to look over some documents with me?" Her response was instant, a little too eager. "Of course, Eleanor. Anything you need. When should I come over?" "Tomorrow afternoon would be wonderful." The next day, she appeared at my door in a navy blazer, hair pinned neatly as if she were interviewing for a position she already believed she had secured. She clutched a leather folder in her hands, too professional, too prepared for someone who was supposedly just doing me a favor. I led her into the living room where I had spread bank statements and insurance policies across the coffee table. I had carefully selected them enough to look important, but not enough to reveal everything. Philip had coached me on this, reminding me that bait only works if the fish believes it's real. "Oh, Eleanor," she sighed, settling into the couch with a smile too polished. "No wonder you're confused. This is complicated. You shouldn't have to handle all this alone." Her fingers skimmed the pages like a pianist gliding over keys, eyes lighting up at the numbers she read. "You've done very well for yourself," she murmured, almost reverently. "But don't you worry, I can help streamline this, make it easier for you." I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "How would you do that?" She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice as if we were conspirators. "There are legal tools, simple paperwork really. Something like a power of attorney. That way, if you ever get too forgetful, I could step in and manage things smoothly. There it was, the hook. I pretended to consider it tapping my chin. Power of attorney. That sounds serious. Wouldn't that mean giving someone complete control? She shook her head quickly. Not at all. You'd still be involved. It's just a safeguard. Families do it all the time. Her words reminded me of a strange fact I once read in medieval Europe. Some towns placed bells inside coffins in case someone was buried alive. People feared losing control so much they needed an escape route, even in death. Cassandra was offering me a coffin with no bell, no rope, no escape. I forced a tremor into my hands as I reached for one of the papers. Maybe you're right. It's hard to keep up with everything these days. Her smile widened. See, I told Jonathan you'd come around. I can bring someone I know. She specializes in this kind of paperwork. We'll make it official. You'll feel so much better once it's done. Someone she knows. I didn't ask who. I already suspected it was Teresa, the shadow name Francis had overheard. As she packed up her folder, humming under her breath like she'd already won, I thought of another lesson age had taught me sometimes. You learn more by pretending ignorance than by showing strength. Wolves don't reveal their teeth to sheep that seem willing. After she left, I called Philip. She's taking the bait. She mentioned power of attorney. His voice on the other end was steady. Good. That means she thinks you're vulnerable. We'll be ready when she makes her move. That night, I sat in the quiet glow of a single lamp, listening to the ticking of the clock. I imagined Cassandra rehearsing her next steps, Teresa waiting in the wings, Jonathan blinded by loyalty, Isabella caught in between. They thought they were playing a game of patience and inevitability. But what they didn't know was that I had just moved my own piece onto the board. And sometimes, even in old age, the queen can still surprise the rook. I decided the confrontation needed to happen somewhere public, somewhere Cassandra couldn't twist the scene into a private misunderstanding. So when Jonathan suggested a small family gathering at my house, just cousins, a few neighbors, and Isabella's piano teacher, I agreed with unusual enthusiasm. Cassandra thought she was walking into a casual afternoon of polite conversation. What she didn't know was that I had arranged the guest list with precision. Philip would be there quietly stationed like a sentinel. Frances, my observant neighbor, had agreed to stop by with her famous peach cobbler, an innocent witness with an excellent memory. I had even invited the pastor's wife because nothing spreads faster than a scandal overheard in church circles. The house buzzed, that evening voices mingling with the clink of glasses. Cassandra entered in a fitted emerald dress, Teresa close behind her, introduced as a legal assistant who helps families with estate planning. The audacity nearly made me laugh aloud. After dinner, I stood by the fireplace holding a folder with papers Philip had helped me prepare. They looked official enough to fool anyone not trained in the law. I've been feeling so forgetful lately, I announced softly, voice pitched just right to carry over the chatter. I thought it might be wise to have Cassandra and her sister review some documents. You know, before I make mistakes. All eyes turned toward the couch where Cassandra and Teresa perched like twin hawks. Cassandra placed a sympathetic hand on mine. That's very sensible, Eleanor. We can help you make sure everything is safe. Teresa pulled out a fountain pen, her expression calm but eyes glinting. If you just sign here, this would authorize Cassandra to assist you with all financial matters. Nothing to worry about. The room hushed. Even Jonathan, who had been refilling drinks, froze. My hand trembled as I lifted the pen, but instead of signing, I looked straight at Cassandra and asked, "Tell me, dear, what exactly is the timeline you mentioned? The one about me not being a problem much longer." The silence cracked open like thunder. Cassandra's face strained, Teresa stiffened. Frances gasped, nearly dropping her plate. Jonathan's voice cut through sharp and confused. "What is she talking about?" I pressed on my tone deceptively mild. "I overheard you. or rather Francis did. Something about speeding things up, something about guardianship. Teresa snapped, "That's ridiculous, she must have misheard." Philip stepped forward, then clearing his throat. "Actually, I've gathered evidence. Conversations, financial records, even correspondence that paints a very troubling picture." He set a thick folder on the coffee table with deliberate force. Cassandra's mask cracked. "You set me up," she hissed under her breath. "Exposure," I said softly, "is the death of deception." The witnesses in the room shifted uncomfortably. The pastor's wife crossed herself. Francis muttered, "I knew I heard it right." Jonathan stared at his wife, disbelief, wrestling with dawning horror. "Cassandra, is this true?" She tried to recover plastering on her martyr smile. "It's all a misunderstanding. I was only trying to protect your mother. She gets so confused sometimes." But her voice quivered, and for the first time I saw fear in her eyes. I thought of an odd historical fact I once read during the Salem witch trials. Some accused women fainted dramatically in court, hoping to gain sympathy. But fainting never erased the evidence against them. Cassandra was doing the same now, hoping theatrics could erase the mountain of proof Philip had placed before us. The room held its breath. My trap had sprung. The queen had moved. And Cassandra, for all her plotting, was suddenly cornered in front of an audience she hadn't prepared to deceive. The silence after my accusation stretched like taut wire. Cassandra's lips parted, but for once she seemed at a loss for words. Teresa, however, was quicker. She leaned forward, her polished nails tapping the table in short, irritated bursts. "This is outrageous! You've been manipulated, Eleanor. Whoever this lawyer friend is, he's feeding you paranoia. We're here to help, not harm." Philip remained steady, unfolding document after document. His voice was calm, deliberate, the cadence of someone accustomed to courtrooms and skeptical judges. "Here are bank records of accounts opened under multiple aliases, all traced back to Cassandra and Teresa Lowe. Here are correspondences with real estate agents in another state discussing liquidation of assets they don't yet own." And here he tapped one page with the end of his pen are messages in which Cassandra refers to Eleanor as the old bat and outlines strategies to gain guardianship of her granddaughter Isabella. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Even the pastor's wife whispered, "Lord have mercy." Jonathan's face drained of color. He shook his head slowly as if denial could undo what was printed in black and white. No, this can't be true, Cassandra." His voice cracked on her name. Cassandra finally found her footing, her mask snapping back into place. "It's all lies," she insisted. "Fabricated. He's trying to turn you against me, Jonathan. Against us." Her tone had that familiar righteous edge, the one that had once convinced me she was fighting noble battles. But tonight it sounded shrill, like a violin string wound too tight. Jonathan looked torn, glancing between the papers and the woman he thought he knew. I saw the war in his eyes. Loyalty, battling logic, love bruised by betrayal. Philip pressed further. "We've also interviewed a prior victim, a widower named Raymond Foster. He described the same tactics, grooming trust, isolating from family, siphoning finances. He nearly lost his home before she disappeared under a different name. And let's not forget, her legal name isn't even Cassandra Lowe." Another gasp. Francis muttered, "I knew she was trouble." Teresa slammed her palm on the table. "This is character assassination." Character Philip raised an eyebrow. One must first possess character to have it assassinated. The absurdity of that line made me want to laugh, but my heart was pounding too hard. I glanced at Isabella, who sat frozen in the corner, her little hands gripping the hem of her dress. She looked so small in that moment, her eyes darting between adults who were supposed to protect her, but were instead unraveling before her. I softened my tone. "Isabella, sweetheart, none of this is your fault. You're safe, always." She nodded slowly, though confusion still clouded her face. The room was suffocating with tension. Cassandra leaned back, her expression hardening. "You're making a mistake, Eleanor. You've embarrassed yourself tonight. When this is over, you'll regret siding with outsiders instead of your own family." But that was the final slip. Outsiders. The word cut deep. Philip, who had fought for truth. Francis, who had spoken when it was easier to stay quiet. Even Isabella, who had drawn a crayon picture that told the truth better than Cassandra's words ever did. They were not outsiders. They were my circle. My allies. I remembered an odd scientific tidbit. I'd once come across: termites can chew through concrete if the cracks are wide enough. That's what Cassandra had done for 3 years, found the cracks in my family and gnawed until she believed the foundation was hers. But tonight, the concrete had been sealed. I looked at her directly, no tremor in my voice. "You've mistaken my kindness for weakness. That was your miscalculation." The sound of sirens outside cut through the air, then faint but undeniable. Philip had timed it perfectly. 2 officers entered moments later, calm but firm, asking Cassandra and Teresa to stand. And in that instant, the curtain dropped. The long con was over. Jonathan stood rooted to the floor, his mouth opening and closing like a man suddenly deprived of language. The officers moved efficiently, reading Cassandra and Teresa their rights. The words rang out steady, official, undeniable. For all of Cassandra's cleverness, there was no rhetorical trick to undo the clink of metal handcuffs. "Jonathan," Cassandra hissed as one officer guided her toward the door, "don't let them do this to me. Tell them this is a mistake. Tell them." Her eyes were wild, not with sorrow, but with fury at being cornered. Teresa muttered under her breath, cursing everyone in the room, though her bravado cracked as neighbors whispered, and the pastor's wife shook her head in pity. Jonathan lifted a hand as if to reach for Cassandra, then let it fall. His shoulders sagged. I don't understand," he whispered. His gaze found mine desperate. "Mom, how could this happen? How did I not see it?" The officers led Cassandra and Teresa out the night air, swallowing their protests. The house felt cavernous in the sudden quiet. Every guest sat stiff, unsure if they should speak or slip away. Frances placed her cobbler on the counter and murmured, "Call me if you need anything before leaving." One by one, the others excused themselves until only Jonathan, Isabella, Philip, and I remained. Jonathan dropped heavily into a chair, elbows on his knees, hands cradling his head. Isabella climbed into his lap, silently resting her cheek against his shoulder. She didn't ask questions. Children often understand when words will only wound further. "I loved her," Jonathan said finally, voice raw. "I built a life with her. How could it all be a lie?" I sat across from him, hands folded in my lap. Age has taught me that sometimes the most intellectual truth is also the most painful love, and deception can live side by side. "Because, son," I said gently, "you wanted to believe in the person she pretended to be. And she knew exactly how to make you believe it." He shook his head, eyes brimming. "And I let her use you. I let her turn me against you." I wanted to absolve him. But honesty demanded something sharper. "Yes, Jonathan, you did. But you also stopped her tonight by choosing to stay. You listened when it mattered." He swallowed hard. "Will Isabella ever forgive me? I let someone treat you like that. I let her twist everything." Isabella shifted, then lifting her small face. "Daddy," she whispered, "Grandma says I'm safe." "If Grandma forgives you, I do too." Tears finally spilled down Jonathan's cheeks, and he held her tight. Philip stood, slipping his papers back into his folder. "There will be a trial," he said quietly. "And it won't be easy. Cassandra is manipulative, and she may try to play victim. But you've taken the first step. The truth is on your side now." After he left, Jonathan remained in the living room long after Isabella had fallen asleep on the couch. He stared into the dim light, his face carved with guilt. I don't know how to fix this, Mom. I thought of a curious fact I'd once read that Japanese artisans practice kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold, making the cracks part of the beauty instead of hiding them. You don't fix it, I told him softly. You live with the cracks. And if you're wise, you fill them with something stronger than before. He nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of it. That night, after Jonathan carried Isabella upstairs, I sat alone at the table where this had all begun. The chandelier's light spilled down like always, but the room felt different, lighter. Cassandra's shadow no longer stretched across it. But I knew shadows linger. Jonathan's wounds were deep. Mine too. Trust doesn't snap back like a rubber band. It frays, and you have to decide whether you're willing to weave it together again. As I extinguished the last lamp, a peculiar calm settled over me. Cassandra thought she'd leave me to die alone. Instead, she'd left me with something far more enduring, a son humbled by truth, a granddaughter untarnished by manipulation, and a chance for the first time in years for healing. In the weeks after Cassandra and Teresa were taken away, the house felt both emptier and freer. Quiet has a different tone when it's relief rather than absence. I would catch myself listening for Cassandra's clipped voice in the hallway or her pointed sighs when she thought I wasn't moving fast enough, and then I'd remember those echoes were gone. Jonathan visited often, sometimes with Isabella, sometimes alone. Each time his face carried that haunted look of a man reckoning with the wreckage of his own choices. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch sipping iced tea, he confessed, "I feel like I've lost years, Mom. Like I was living under glass, seeing only what she allowed me to see." I studied him. The boy who had once scraped his knees playing basketball in the driveway, now a grown man bent under invisible weight. You weren't blind, I told him gently. You were trusting. And trust is not weakness. It's just dangerous when given to the wrong hands. He nodded, staring out at the garden. It'll take time for Isabella to understand. For me too. I thought of something strange I'd read in an old psychology article, that trauma doesn't vanish, it calcifies. It becomes part of the bone. But bones can still carry you forward even when scarred. Time is a sculptor, I said. It shapes us whether we want it to or not, but we choose what form we'll take. The trial moved quickly thanks to Philip's thorough work. Cassandra tried her usual theatrics tears on command, elaborate stories of selfless sacrifice. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury saw through her polished mask. Teresa fared no better. When the verdict was read guilty on multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy, Jonathan exhaled like a man surfacing after years underwater. Still, freedom comes with scars. I found myself double-checking locks, hesitating before opening my door, wary of shadows that weren't even there. At night, I sometimes dreamed of Cassandra's voice, whispering about timelines and backup plans. Waking, I had to remind myself she was behind bars, her plans collapsed. One evening, Isabella came to spend the night. As I tucked her into bed, she looked at me with those earnest eyes only children carry. Grandma was Mommy Cassandra really bad. I sat beside her, smoothing her hair. She was sick in her heart, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups hurt people because they can't see beyond their own hunger. She frowned, but she said she loved me. She might have believed she did. But real love isn't about taking. It's about giving without expecting something back. Her small hand squeezed mine. Then you love me the most. Tears pricked my eyes. Yes, darling, I do. Later, as I sat alone in my study, I reflected on the strange journey. I had thought age would bring only aches and nostalgia. Instead, it had demanded vigilance, strategy, and courage I hadn't expected to summon again. A peculiar thought crossed my mind. Did you know sea turtles can live for over a century? Weathering countless storms, currents, and predators, longevity itself becomes a form of defiance. Perhaps surviving Cassandra's schemes was my own quiet defiance. Jonathan stopped by the next morning with a bouquet of lilies, awkward in his hands. "For you," he said sheepishly. "I know flowers don't fix everything, but—" I took them, inhaled their sweet fragrance, and smiled. "Flowers don't fix, Jonathan, but they remind us things can bloom again." He stayed for lunch, Isabella chattering between us about her school recital. For the first time in months, maybe years, laughter felt genuine in this house. And though scars remained, I understood something important. Freedom is never clean. It's jagged, messy, and costly. But it's also priceless. By the time spring rolled in, the roses in my garden had begun to bloom again. Their crimson petals unfolded like pages of a book, each one telling me in color what words could only attempt life persists. The air smelled of soil and rain, and for once, I wasn't waiting for shadows to creep around the corner. Jonathan had started coming by regularly with Isabella, sometimes just for dinner, sometimes for no reason at all. I could see him rebuilding himself in small, careful ways, taking on extra work, cooking meals for his daughter, even fixing the loose shutters on my porch without being asked. He didn't say it outright, but I knew he was trying to replace the hollow spaces Cassandra had left behind. One Saturday afternoon, Isabella raced through the yard, hair flying, laughter trailing after her like ribbons. She stopped at the rose bushes, cupped a bloom in her hands, and shouted, "Grandma, look! It's even prettier than last year!" I knelt beside her, my knees protesting with familiar stiffness. "That's what happens when you prune back the dead parts, sweetheart. The flowers have more room to grow." It struck me then how perfectly the garden mirrored us. We had cut away something poisonous, and now new growth was possible. Later that evening, Jonathan sat across from me at the kitchen table. His voice was quiet but steady. "Mom, I still feel guilty every day. For not seeing, for letting her use us. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself." I reached for his hand, squeezed it gently. "Guilt is a heavy coat, son. You can wear it if you choose, but it won't keep you warm. Take it off when you're ready." He looked down, nodded, a tear slipping free. Isabella came bounding in, then, with a drawing, 3 figures again, holding hands under a blue sky. This time, though, she had drawn 4 herself, Jonathan, me, and a bright yellow sun smiling above us. No shadows, no Cassandra. I pinned it on the fridge, right where the old one had hung. And for the first time in years, I believed the picture matched the truth. That night, as I sat by the window with the lamp dimmed low, I thought of an odd fact I'd once read, that starlight we see tonight may have traveled for thousands of years, crossing darkness we can't even imagine. It arrives long after the star itself has died. Hope is like that, I realized. Sometimes it takes years to arrive, but when it does, it illuminates everything. Cassandra had sneered once that I'd die alone. She couldn't have been more wrong. My home was filled with the sound of my granddaughter's laughter, my son's footsteps returning, and the steady rhythm of my own heart refusing to give up. The queen had survived the game. And not just survived, she had kept the board, the garden, and the family that truly mattered. The story begins with a tense dinner where Cassandra, my daughter-in-law, reveals the disdain she has long hidden behind polished smiles. Her words open a wound that had been festering for years, and I finally begin to connect the dots between her ideological lectures and the endless financial requests. Sleepless nights push me to investigate. The evidence is staggering, thousands drained under the guise of justice and responsibility, all while she flaunts her luxuries online. With the help of Philip, an old friend and lawyer, I uncover a darker truth. Cassandra isn't just ungrateful. She's a predator working with her sister Teresa to build a case portraying me as incompetent with the goal of seizing my assets and even guardianship of my granddaughter Isabella. The more I watch, the clearer the pattern becomes. Cassandra manipulates Jonathan, my son, twisting his loyalty while planting seeds of doubt in Isabella's young mind. But with patience, I turn her strategy against her. At a carefully arranged family gathering, Cassandra and Teresa reveal themselves pressured into overconfidence. Philip and key witnesses present the evidence, and the police arrive to end their scheme. What follows is painful Jonathan's heartbreak, Isabella's confusion, and my own grappling with scars of betrayal. But healing begins. Cassandra and Teresa are sentenced, their masks stripped away. Jonathan slowly rebuilds trust, Isabella flourishes in innocence, and I reclaim my dignity. In the end, the house is quiet but not lonely. Roses bloom stronger after pruning. My family, though fractured, learns resilience. Cassandra was wrong. I will not die alone. I have laughter, love, and the knowledge that even in old age, strength can still surprise those who mistake kindness for weakness.